everyone. I promised myself I would never do tutorials because I really don't feel like I have an expert enough skill set in any one area to actually effectively teach it. In the end, I decided that I would do a video for COVID or COVID. I don't know. I decided that I would do a video for this project because I think the one thing that I do a lot of and the one thing that I actually do really well is pattern hacking. The 3 pattern hacks that I want to show you today are a sleeve hack and then 2 that are related to a late bustle era bodice. The sleeve hack is pretty general and it will just give you some tips on adding sleeves to different patterns, but the 2 bodices are a little bit more specific. I decided to work with the same truly Victorian pattern for both of these pattern hacks. The first one will be taking a daytime bodice and turning it into a nighttime bodice by changing the neckline and removing the sleeves. And the second bodice hack is going to show you how to add a sailor collar to a pattern that didn't originally have one. Let's get started. When mixing and matching a bodice and a sleeve pattern, the first thing that you're going to do is make the bodice and the sleeve exactly as you normally would. The only thing that you're really going to do differently is figure out how to set the sleeve in correctly so that it sits the right way on your body. Normally the pattern will have markings that tell you how to set the sleeve in, but because you're not using the sleeve from the pattern, you'll need to figure out how to do that yourself. The best way to do that is to find the highest and the lowest point on the arm side. On modern patterns, there's normally a seam at both of these points, but for historical patterns, that's often not true. So don't get tricked by a shoulder seam. Once you've found the high and the low point on the bodice, you need to do the same thing for the sleeve. Normally you can accomplish this just by folding it in half and it should be pretty obvious. If you're struggling with it, you can also just put the bodice and the sleeve on your body at the same time, let your arms relax normally and see where they match up. Once you've found these 2 points on the sleeve and these 2 points on the bodice, you match them together and just pin to make it fit. There are probably some exceptions to this technique, but I haven't found any. This almost always works. One of my favorite pattern hacks is to add these big 1890s sleeves to almost any blouse or vest. The gathers in them make them really forgiving.
It just looks like a fuzzy blob sticking up from the bottom.
All right, for our next pattern hack, we're going to talk about how to turn the French vest bodice into a daytime bodice that has a square neckline and a sailor collar. All right, the first step is to cut out all the pieces exactly as you normally would for this pattern. I'm going to assume that you've worked with this pattern before, so I'm not really going to spend any time actually talking about how this pattern is normally put together. The only thing that we're going to cover are the changes that we're going to make. Once you've cut your pieces out, go ahead and sew them together as you normally would. At this stage, the only thing that you don't want to sew to the bodice are the 2 pieces that form the center front. Okay, up until now you have hopefully just sewn everything exactly the way that it was written in the pattern. What you need to do is make a new neckline. You're going to basically make a decision about how low cut you want your top to be. And then bam, new square neckline. Okay, so I went ahead and made those cuts on the center front pieces. And I'd like to point out while we're here that we're actually about 90% of the way to a keyhole neckline. Now, Truly Victorian actually does have a keyhole neckline in their pattern collection, but if you're a little short on cash or you don't want to wait for it to come in the mail, I think that it would be pretty simple to make some minor changes to this pattern piece and get what you need. So the first thing that I would do is measure what I need for it to actually make contact, the 2 points in the front. So it looks like the top half needs to be about 1 inch longer. You know that it needs to be about 1 inch longer. So I would just take a piece of plain printer paper and stack it underneath. And mark 1 inch extra. And then once I've done that, I will just connect this to the piece that already exists. I think this will work. Probably. We'll see. Probably actually should have done this first, but I will pin this to the actual paper. Use your non-fabric scissors to cut the shape out. And then I would put it back on the mannequin to see if I got it right. Now hopefully you can see what I have here, which is that this meets almost exactly in the middle. And then I've just like done a ruler to use to a straight line to make sure that I just took the extra measure into this side seam. The one thing that I have forgotten to account for in my little triangle is I haven't put seam allowance in it. So I would have to go back and probably do this again and put another 5/8 of an inch to make sure that the two pieces actually do meet at the center and a little bit of overlap for a closure. The only unfortunate thing is you would have to do a muslin to make sure that you got this right. You probably couldn't make this change just from the pieces as they exist. Now, since we are not doing a keyhole neckline today, what you're gonna wanna do is take out the extra measurement here. So we actually don't want it to slant towards the front like this. So we need to kind of just figure out through trial and error how much needs to be taken out. So I would probably just tuck it in like this. Is that gonna come out right? I guess we'll see. Yeah, that seems right. I'm definitely not an expert on any of this. I'm just showing you what I would do. So by all means, if you find someone who knows what they're talking about, you should probably listen to them instead of me, because I don't know what's going on, ever. That's probably not a good theory to go with sewing. Okay, so now you can see I have some pins that mark where I want them to be. I'm gonna take this back to my cutting table and make the changes over there. I have for you here probably the weirdest looking sailor collar in existence. Because the sailor collar pattern that I found is not gonna match to the same neckline, you have to actually change the original neckline to fit. You're going to start by making a cut all the way down the center of the sailor collar and having it stop where it otherwise would have done so if you'd followed the original pattern. So once you've made this long center cut down the front, you go to the back of your garment and you're going to match the place where it splits to the center back seam. And I am going to do that twice. Once at the top and once at the bottom. And then you want to figure out how you want the collar to lay. You want it to be like kind of even. So I'm going to stab a couple more pins in it near the shoulders. And take out the center one. That looks right. It's a little bit wide, but a lot of that will actually be taken out in the seam allowance, so it should look right at the ends. Hopefully. If not, I can probably make some changes later, something that you can probably fix. Okay, so what you're gonna do is once you have it anchored so that it lays correctly in the back, you are going to take pins and just carefully pin it to the neckline, making sure that it lays the way that you want it to. Eventually, you're just gonna take the whole thing off the mannequin and follow the spots that you pinned. And we're actually only going to do this for one side because, like I said, as long as both sides match, that's really the most important thing. And I'm just like carefully picking it up. I hope this works, you guys. I think I did it differently last time, but I didn't have as good a results. So I figured I would try it differently. Some teacher I am. I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work. We'll see. I think that looks pretty good. Okay. I think I'm doing this right. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
I'm hoping that you can see what's going on here. Essentially what I've done is pin the sailor collar around the neckline of the bodice so that it matches. Now that I've got it on my cutting table, I'm going to go ahead and cut the sailor collar to match the curvature of the neckline on the bodice. Alright guys, this is Editing Ivy here, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm about to make a mistake and cut the original line instead of the line that I marked with my pins. I ended up putting it back on my dress form and figured out what I'd done. I came back to the cutting table and fixed it, but unfortunately I forgot to film that part. So don't do what I did and get hypnotized by that original chalk line. Make sure that you're actually cutting it along the line that you marked with your pins. Alright, go ahead and unpin it from your bodice, fold it in half, and make the same changes to the other side of the sailor collar.
At this stage, you should have two sailor collars, one for the lining and one for the outer shell, that are both cut to the size that we measured in the last step. Before you finish the edges of your collar, you need to make a little clip where you want it to stop being attached, because like I said, these will be loose on the front of the jacket. It's not sewn into a seam. So this will help it lay flat after you have lined the collar and lined the jacket separately. So you want to do that on either side. Be sure to make sure that it's not any larger than your seam allowance, so about ½ an inch is usually good. And then I'm gonna take this off and finish the edge of the collar. All right, you guys, if everything went according to plan, you now have a sailor collar that is fully finished around the edges, except for where it's going to be taken into the seam allowance. So you should have this nice convenient little notch, which will be matched right here at the corners, and then you'll either add your facing or your lining. And so eventually it should look nice and clean like that. That's more or less it for the changes that you actually had to pattern hack. From here on out, you're more or less finishing it in the way that the pattern intended.
All right, here's a quick shot of the finished bodice. I ended up basting down the tails to the bodice so that they wouldn't flop about, and I also added a bow to the center front for a little bit more detail.
Go. Be free. Obviously, I had to do some filming on a few different days because this was kind of a big project, so I'm wearing something different today, so forgive me for the time traveling. The next pattern hack that I was going to show you was going to be how to turn the French vest bodice into an evening bodice instead of a daytime bodice, and I realized that actually the instructions for that are identical to the instructions for the sailor collar. So I'm going to quickly run you through what it looks like and then show you how to make a pair of cycling pants using just any random pattern that you have for pants laying around. It's pretty simple, and it is the pants that I'm wearing today. Super versatile, very easy to make, and a really good project for a beginner. So I will first show you that evening bodice, and then I will run you through how to make a pair of cycling pants. I'm sure that you can see already that this looks really similar to the first couple of steps for the sailor bodice. As you can see, I just followed the same instructions for turning it into a square neckline. Originally, when I was planning this pattern hack, I was gonna take a little bit out of the shoulder seam because when you leave the sleeves out, you often have to make a change to the arm side. Well, this is actually a bodice that's based on a specific drawing that I want to work with, and actually if you look really closely at her shoulder, the bodice actually does have almost like a very tiny sleeve. If you were going to do something like this, it's super simple. You just fold it until it looks the way that you want it to, mark it, cut off the extra, and then make the same change on the other side. So because this is such a simple pattern hack, I don't feel like I've really given you any new information here. Instead, I'm going to show you how to make a pair of cycling trousers.
But before I show you that pair of cycling trousers, here's a couple shots of the finished version of that evening bodice. There really aren't any new construction techniques here. The only thing you might be wondering about are the stripes, which were just done using some white ribbon stitched directly to the outside of the bodice. This evening bodice did come out a little bit more low cut than I'm normally comfortable with, which is why it's always a good idea to try things on as you go instead of waiting till the end. But in my defense, the drawing that I was working from is also pretty low cut. All right, now let's get back to those trousers.
The only pattern that you need for this is literally any random pattern for a pair of shorts or a pair of pants. The reason that you can use literally any random pattern is because the only information that you need from that pattern is what the crotch curvature actually looks like. Take a piece of tailor's chalk, and then I would mark it with a little line at the top and bottom where the original pieces were. Now, once you have the curve that you need to make sure that the seam is actually long enough. So because the cycling pants are, for lack of a better word, a little bit baggy in the crotch, you need to add probably about 2 extra to the bottom.
Real quick, we've got Editing Ivy here to explain that while those 2 inches do contribute to the way that the crotch fits at the bottom of the seam, you just add that extra measurement to the top of the seam, not the bottom.
And then you need to measure how far up they need to go in order to hit you at the natural waist. So the way that you would do that is put on a pair of pants that you already own, take your tape measure and put it between your legs where the crotch seam ends, and then measure all the way up to about your belly button. And then I would add another ½ inch or so for seam allowance. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and add the seam across the top. I used to have a yardstick, but I definitely cannot find it. Oh well. And go ahead and trace that as straight as you can. So the next measurement that you need is to figure out how long you want your cycling pants to be in the end. I just went ahead and took my tape measure and measured from my waist to just below my knee, and then that is what you add to the side seam. I would say that this project usually takes around 2 to 2.5 yards, depending on what size you wear and how tall you are.
All right, go ahead and add the last 2 lines for the inseam and the hem. And then you should have a piece that pretty much looks like this. So this video is definitely not technically sponsored, but I did want to give a shout out to LDH Scissors, who sent me this pair so that I could try them out. Not only am I like super excited to actually have been approached by a brand, but these scissors are legitimately incredible. What I really love about them is that they're just a little bit longer than standard. It definitely makes it feel like you're saving a lot of time when you have a ton of long cuts to make. We're nearing the home stretch. Now that we've finished the changes that we needed to make to the front piece, we're gonna mimic those same changes on the back piece so that they'll match.
All right, if everything went according to plan, you should have a giant pair of short pants. I chose to do my closure as a fly front zipper. Even though that's not historically accurate, it made it a lot easier to add pockets into the side seams, and your girl needs pockets. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. The last two steps are to pleat the top into a waistband and then to pleat the bottom into some cuffs. I might add just a couple of buttons for decoration as well, but other than that, you're pretty much done.
All right, here are a few shots of the finished product. I have to say that while I'm pretty happy with every individual piece, I do feel like it kind of makes me look like a little servant boy, or like maybe I'm going golfing. I don't know. I think the overall effect is a little bit odd, and this is definitely an ensemble that I need to work on.
All right, I think that that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I know this video was kind of all over the place, but hopefully you found something in it useful, and I will see you next time. So I bought these fake glasses on Amazon, and they were labeled like nerd glasses or something like that. And I was like, wow, it's a good thing my real glasses don't look anything like that.